thank you guys for being here. So I just wanted to say hi, wanted to welcome everyone. Thank you, Tonya and Kenny, for being here. So for those of you that don't know Tonya and Kenny, which I think everyone here does because they're really well-known people in our community, Kenny is the Occoquan District Supervisor in Prince William County, and Tonya is the Field Director for the Virginia Coordinated Campaign, as well as a veteran. And they're both some of the coolest people I've met throughout being in the grassroots, which is not saying a lot because I'm still 19 years old. But you both have blown my mind consistently, and we really look forward to hearing from you both. So the topic today is going to be civic engagement, involvement, as well as sort of tangentially whatever it might come down to. Obviously, times are really tough right now, and there's a lot of stuff that we can unpack during this meeting, so we don't dislike tangents here. But Tonya and Kenny, did you guys have anything you wanted to say before I start just asking questions?
Sure. Tonya, did you want to start?
Go ahead, Kenny.
Sure. So first, thank you so much for putting this on. It's really important, especially with everything going on right now, that folks stay engaged, right? This is the biggest topic for this is civic engagement, making sure people from all backgrounds, especially young people and people of color, to stay engaged with their civic engagement. So that's the political process, that's, elections, that's, your day-to-day, what affects your government, especially as a locally elected official. It's frustrating with how many people just sort of don't realize how, especially at the local level, we affect your day-to-day life. I mean, as a district supervisor, I make the decisions on how your tax money is spent. I make the decisions on where things can and can't be built. A lot of people are so obsessed with the federal level. Nothing against Tonya, who's overseeing a bunch of federal candidates this year. But Congress does impact our lives, but everything going on in the White House and in Congress, there's a lag there. It takes a long time for things in Congress to affect your life here on the ground. But decisions I make affect people's lives almost immediately in some cases. A quick couple examples of that. Like I said, our tax policies. Tax policies we put into place in March are now affecting people in July. Ordinances that we passed just last month in terms of non-discrimination policy against people from the LGBTQ community or for pregnant mothers affects our county's non-discrimination policies now. And also give Tonya a brief shout out because she's also one of our human rights commissioners here in Prince William County. So she helps oversee making sure folks, if they have a legitimate claim of discrimination, those things are prosecuted and they're investigated properly. So on the local level, what I'll finish with is, don't tune out to that. It's not the sexy stuff. Land use policy, tax policy isn't the stuff that's going to make headlines necessarily. But if you want to know what's actually going to, put food on your table, make sure, the policing is right, those policies are written on a local level, not necessarily in Congress. So please, please, please stay involved.
Thank you, Kenny. And Kenny is absolutely right. Anyone that knows me knows that I am super passionate about voter education, not just Democrats winning up and down the ticket, but I'm super passionate about the process from engaging voters, from registering voters, from what happens on the local level. Any daily activity, like Kenny said, like how our kids get on the school buses, the amount of money that are given to our schools, what's happening right now with the elections. It happens at a local level, and I'm grateful to have supervisors like Kenny on the board of county supervisors who are going to make sure those elections are fair. People are scared right now about mail-in ballot, absentee ballot, early vote, but it is those local electeds who matter the most in securing that and making sure that the process is democratic. So also thank you for having me here.
Of course, thank you both of you for being here. We really, really appreciate it. When we were planning this, both of you came to mind immediately, and we're really happy that both of you could be on a panel together because we really think you both complement one another, because Kenny's obviously got the, political, quite literally the running for office experience, while Tonya, you have the behind the scenes, which is so interesting. So I'd kind of like to start there. What motivated both of you to get into politics? And I think in this answer, I'd love to hear about some of the fears you had to overcome while joining, because I know, Tonya, you were previously in the Marines, and Kenny, you went from not running for office to running for office. And I'm sure those are scary experiences.
Absolutely. Very scary, but I tell you what, there's nothing more scarier than waking up and realizing that Donald Trump has been elected the next president of the United States. So that definitely was a call to action for me personally, just because when he was elected, I just had retired out of the Marine Corps less than a year ago. So with having so many Marines who I consider friends, family, Marines that I mentored and trained in the Marine Corps still in uniform, and understanding that the commander-in-chief, with the president being the commander-in-chief, those active duty members and their families are the ones who are the first to be impacted by who that president is. And that was just a scary thought for me, to know that some of them could be put in harm's way from someone who is definitely unstable and does not understand that the first rule is diplomacy and not troops on the ground. So that was 100% my call to action. I think for me, not understanding how to get there, how do you get involved, where is the entry point, was probably the biggest challenge. But luckily, I just kind of stumbled upon it. I spoke it into existence, and I stumbled my way into organizing, and I've just been organizing ever since.
And we're very happy that you are organizing.
I think at this point, the entire state of Virginia is very happy that Tonya has been on the ground working with everyone. For me, I've had a lot of different little things that have happened in my life that led me to this point. I grew up in LA, in a very immigrant, diverse part of LA. And in my high school, my senior class, my government teacher made us work the polls on election day back in 2004, to date me a little bit. And that was Kerry versus Bush. And, we had folks from my neighborhood, because I had to volunteer at my own local precinct, from all over the world. We had Armenian immigrants, Vietnamese immigrants, Mexican immigrants, folks from all over the world. And they knew one thing, that this country gave them the ability to choose their next leader. And many of them did not want George W. Bush to be the president anymore. And so to me, these folks who, some of their countries did not ever give them that chance, and here we were. That was number one. Two, I went to Georgetown, and so I got involved in sort of learning about politics and government very early on. But for a long time, I had a certain perspective, and we all did, on what kind of person could even be a politician, right? Who could be the president? Who our leaders were. But then Barack Obama not only got the nomination, he became our president back in 2008. Someone with a very similar background as me. I'm also biracial. My dad is my white parent versus my mom, my black parent. But my dad's family comes from the Midwest, just like Barack's, President Obama's mom's family. And so to know that someone who looked like me, who talked like me, who has a very similar background, was able to make that kind of substantial change in people's lives, made me, frankly, a lot more comfortable in my skin, and also proved to me that I could have a chance of impacting people's lives. So then there's what caused me to actually get there, right? And back 4 years ago, on top of everything else that happened with Donald Trump and all the craziness happening, I lost my mom in April of 2016. She passed away due to chronic homelessness and substance abuse. And it made me realize that there's too many people in our society that fall through the cracks. My mom was diagnosed bipolar in her late 50s / her early 60s. It took her almost 60 years of her life for us to find out what she was going through and the demons that she faced. And so that told me that there's a lot of people like my mom out there who the system frankly just fails. And a lot of people say it's because the system is broken. But I've come to find out in the last couple of years, it's not. It's working exactly as intended, where Black and brown people, especially minorities, marginalized communities, they're designed to be left out of the conversation. They're designed for the system to not cater or help them. It's designed to help the chosen few who have been given that privilege since the founding of our country. And so I knew that I could no longer just work on campaigns. I could no longer just sit on the sidelines. While organizing work is important, and people like Tonya are doing yeoman's work every single day to make sure people get elected, we also need people to run for office, to step up and actually be that voice, be at that table when decisions are being made about tax policy, about land use, about laws being created, because until we ourselves are at those tables, the only people making decisions for us are not us. The only people making decisions for us are people that can only give sympathy as opposed to walking in our shoes. And so the last thing I'll say is I've taken something that I've seen, said quite a bit to heart, that I want to be the person that I needed when I was growing up. I want to be that person that I always needed that I didn't have in my life. And if I can be that person to someone else coming up, it'll all been worth it, because I want to be able to have folks that look like me, that look like us, be able to look and see, if I want to make sure that the world is a better place by the end of my days, I can do it because I see that person can do it. And that is what I'm trying to do now. And that was my call to action. And that's what continues to keep me getting up every single day to do what I do.
Thank you, Kenny. It's so great to see someone in public office that takes their job very seriously and holds themselves clearly accountable for the work that they do. And I think that's something that we have talked a lot about in previous forums, and a discussion that the young people that helped us, Grace, Rome, and Nikita, the individuals that helped start this organization, have always talked about accountability with our government. And so it's great to see someone like that stepping up to the plate. I wanted to ask a question that's a bit touchy about representation. So as a brown female myself, you can often be seen as sort of the diversity pick, and people like to write off the experience and the work that you've done by saying that you don't actually deserve to be there, but your skin tone is what's led you to be somewhere. This is obviously a huge issue, and a much bigger issue for individuals of the Black community, because they face constant incorrect rhetoric regarding affirmative action and just general racism in society regarding HR involvement in diversity, or like poor diversity training, or people really not understanding what representation looks like. So I'd love to hear from both of you about how you tackle when people come up to you and say, "Oh, you're just here because of the color of your skin," and sort of discount your experiences, because Tonya, like you're a Marine. Like, first and foremost, that's insane, right? You're a Marine. You've been organizing since. You're like one of the tried and true organizers that I met back when I was like first entering all of this back in 2016. And Kenny, like you've been in politics and in the grassroots for just as long as I've known you. And so how do you guys address comments like that?
Kenny, you want to take a stab at that first? Or
sure. That's a big question. I appreciate that question. It's interesting, right? Because it's this subversion of privilege that somehow, because we've made it, that we've been given something that other people don't have. This idea that the only reason why we're in these rooms is because of how we look. And, let's be real on this. We know that in some cases, some folks see it that way. They think that, oh, well, we need at least one Black person in here to make it look like we're diverse, or we need at least one brown person in here because, otherwise people are going to look at us a certain way. But what I would challenge anyone to that line of thinking is, you don't know how the rest of our lives have been up until this point. You don't know about the constant racism we face every day. You don't know about the fact that every time I go into a store, most likely more often than not, I'm asked several times, do you need help, sir? Do you need help, ma'am? Do you need this? Do you need that? Or every time I'm driving down the street, even as an elected official, and I see a cop car go by, my entire posture changes. Or every single time that that I've had to go into a room of predominantly, white folks more often than not, we all do that thing where we pick out how many folks that are not white in that room, and then someone approaches me, and unless they know me, they're wondering who I work with. They're wondering who my dad or mom might be, and that goes to ageism as well. Or they wonder, what credibility do I have, and who must I know in order to be in that room, right? And so the notion that somehow we're given more opportunities as opposed to less because of the color of our skin or because of our gender or because of our orientation or what have you, it speaks to just how much other people view their own entitlement, right? Because in their minds, the only way for us to have gotten more over these last years is if somehow they are receiving less. And that frankly speaks to how a lot of folks are privileged see right that somehow my work and my work ethic, the fact that I've knocked on thousands of doors, and Tonya has sheets and sheets of me volunteering over the last 4 years on how many doors I've knocked, even when I was on a ballot, that somehow that hard work was just given. But that's because in their own lives, they are the recipients of such privilege, that they don't have to work nearly as hard to get twice as far as all of us. So for them, it's second nature because they're fish in water, and they don't realize that other people have to live different lives and have different lived experiences. I know it's a very verbose way of getting back to it, but I'll just finish by saying privilege is a hard thing to point out to people that have lived it their entire lives. And to know that there are people that had to work harder than you to get to where you also are makes you more insecure, because that person realizes, well, that means that I have to do more, and they don't want to do more.
I would say I don't know if I've had to tackle that head on, but what I have had to tackle in this space of politics and being in leadership the last 3 cycles is the struggle to find people of color, to find Black people, brown people that can and want to do this work. I say can and want because, again, to be able to do this work does require, in some instances, a certain level of privilege. Like I said in the beginning, just trying to figure out how to get to the point of volunteering, what's a local party, because people always think of the DNC and not very much on a local level. So when it comes time for hiring, and it's very important to me, being in leadership, to have people in spaces that reflect our different communities here in Virginia. So I'd say that's a struggle in itself, because you have to arrive with a certain level of privilege to be able to do it, because not a lot of Black and brown kids straight out of college, or can take a year off of college to come and work a campaign cycle. And so I would like to see a space where we spend more time and we cast a wider net to be able to recruit and be able to make it so that it is something that people of color can do. And with that being said, when we do find Black and brown applicants to be in these spaces, we have to also make sure that they are well received, that they don't get those, why are you here? Because they're not there because of their skin tone. They're there because of their qualifications. So those are the struggles I do deal with on a daily basis, trying to make sure that, I don't have a field team that's completely white and male, cisgendered males. So just trying to find beautiful people who actually reflect the communities of Virginia is something that I think And I would like conversations to be had more of on every level, on, you know, the local party level, the state party level, the DNC level, at the, you know, the D-TRIP, the DSCC, that we're talking about how to recruit and engage applicants of color.
If I could piggyback just for
Anyone
a
here
quick
need-
second off of that.
Go ahead.
If I could piggyback off of that just for a quick second. And then so a challenge, right, to organizing and knocking doors and stuff like that is, you know, the playbook originally, to what Tonya just said, was written by and for, you know, 20 to 30-year-old white males, because they were largely the ones that have the privilege to do the work. And then by virtue of that, also the candidates, same thing. And I'll just give a quick anecdote from last year on how that's not always helpful for us folks of Black and brown communities. There's a state senator who helps represent this area that told me, hey, you need to be knocking until 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. And that's fine if you're a white guy. If the sun has gone down, you're walking, and he even says things like, you know, cut across people's lawns to get to houses faster. If you're a white guy and it's 9 or 10 o'clock at night, the sun is already down, you're probably okay. Even if you're a white woman, you're probably okay. But if they see me walking through someone's lawn at 9 o'clock at night, the sun is down, I will probably not have a great of time. So it's all about having the right folks who are in these conversations to know. And to Tonya's point, it's also making sure that we are able to hire the talent that are even able to speak to those issues, because, you know, there are other things we can be doing with that time instead if we have those limitations. So it's all about making sure that we have the space, like Tonya said, to make sure that we have a huge broad brush of people from all walks of life that are even able to organize and run campaigns and even run for office.
Absolutely. Thank you for both of those very comprehensive responses. And I can't agree more that being able to be in politics is frequently a byproduct of a lot of privilege. And I think that's unfortunate. And I think it bleeds into even like not just race, but it's also, I think, a class issue. Right. And I think that's a huge problem in a country that considers itself, you know, the social experiment and, you know, a cornerstone of democracy. So kind of on that note, you guys mentioned how, you know, privilege bleeds into whether you can really run for politics effectively. It's just everything, every problem bleeds into one another. And sometimes it feels like there's just so much work. And I can't even imagine how daunting that must feel as two members of the Black community, having to deal with all of those general issues that everyone else is considering, but also have to, you know, generally fear for your lives all the time. So today's session is about civic engagement. So I wanted to ask you, one, how do you keep your cool? Because both of you are very calm and put together individuals, and I can't even imagine being that calm with as much as you must have on in your head at all times. But also, what do you recommend to younger individuals who can't really keep their cool because they're just finding out about all of this, and like those 15-year-olds, yeah, you know, they're freaking out right now. So what advice do you have to them?
Thank you for that assessment. I don't know if I always keep my cool. I definitely try to keep my cool and take deep breaths. But for me, in anything in life, it's always been my understanding that if there's a problem, you need to figure out a solution. So just like I said, you know, Donald Trump was elected. The call to action was to resist at every turn. So even when, you know, I'm talking to my daughter about everything that's going on right now, okay, what are some things that you as a person can do to combat this? Because what we need to get out of the framework of, you know, fighting with people on social media. You're never going to change anyone's mind on that. But can you write a letter to your congresswoman? Can you engage with a grassroots or a special interest group that you care about? Yes, you can. So it's always been, you can't change the world, but you can change the world that you live in. And so that's what you know, I try to instill in her, and I try to instill in young organizers as well. Let's do the work here. Let's do something that matters. Oh, you're angry about something that a Republican tweeted about today? Okay, let's make 20 more phone calls. Let's go into spaces that, with like-minded individuals. Let's go talk to this DIMS committee. Let's go talk to this grassroots committee. Let's go talk to the people who are actually doing the work. That's key. Just to get engaged, stay engaged at every single level. Some people don't want to knock doors and talk or make phone calls and talk about politics, because that's definitely a huge step to be able to want to do that, to have that type of persuasion conversation with the voter. That's a huge way to put yourself out there. But you can talk to your friends about registering to vote. You can make sure that they know how to vote. You can make sure that they know that if they're going back to school, to college this fall, or if they're not, to make sure they're going to be where they need to be to vote on November, or that they know how to request a absentee ballot. And also, I guess it's a thing, but how to buy a stamp. So it's the little things that add up to become big sweeping change in the future.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Tonya, because I agree. I mean, definitely we want folks to be able to sit with their feelings and be able to express themselves, right? We don't ever want someone to suppress their frustrations or even tell someone how they should advocate for themselves, especially if they're in a marginalized community. But it's all about having that conversation of how to direct that energy and that frustration and that anger in a productive direction. And I mean, personally for me, writing helps. Putting words to what I'm feeling helps. Capturing what I want to see next, to Tonya's point about action, into words helps, because like Tonya said before, you can have your thoughts, you can have your feelings, you can have what's you want to see, but until you think, feel, and most importantly, plan that into action, it just stays amorphous. It just stays something that's inside of you. And not only is that unproductive from actually making change, but that's how things fester. That's how you sit with that anger for a long time and let that, unfortunately, a lot of people's situations consume them. And that's all they become, is just, I have this feeling, it's wrong, it's unjust, but that's all you stay as. You don't go to becoming this, I feel like there's an injustice, to how do I create justice as a response to that? And so for me, it's all about taking that feeling and the thoughts that come with it, turning it into words, and then turning those words into actions. And that's a short-term, medium-term, and long-term thing, because Tonya just talked about a lot of great tactics, phone banking, canvassing, having town halls, going to your local DIM committee. And then what's the next step to that? What's that overall strategy that you're trying to accomplish, where it becomes, okay, my strategy is I want to, over the course of the next 3 months, 5 months, year, take this terrible situation, empower people to be able to do something about it, to then at the end goal being, let's make sure we get people that align with our values and how we see the world, versus someone who obviously does not and wants to even destroy what we feel and what we hold dear for the sake of himself and a chosen few.
Absolutely. I think those are both spot on, and something that I've definitely seen for a lot of young people. The only outlet seems to be politics, and I get it. So I wanted to mention to everyone here that you are welcome to ask a question in the chat at any given time, or just say if you want to ask your question out loud, you're completely welcome to. But I was telling Tonya before, I have infinite questions, so no worries there. So I did want to, so when I first met Tonya and Kenny, I was in high school. Times have changed. I'm now in college. So things, things change up. And the issue that I've been seeing a lot with young people is, while we are some of the most passionate people in this country, and if every young person voted, you know, it's been said that if the voter turnout were higher, typically Democratic nominees win, which like makes logical sense, because you've just got a greater population voting. And the concern is, on college campuses, although we have Next Gen and other resources to tell us to vote, what are we doing to make voting more accessible? Because, for example, I go to school in Williamsburg, but I also go to school in Scotland. And my district is still Northern Virginia. And so I have to request that absentee ballot and pick that up, and the mailing, there's a mail room, and in between classes, you have to run by the mail room to pick up your absentee ballot. And it's just kind of a stressful ordeal. So Kenny, I'd like to hear from your perspective, from an elected official standpoint. What are we doing to make voting more accessible to young people everywhere, whether they are in college or in the military or wherever they may be? As well as from Tonya, how are you seeing elected officials' platforms change from the background to help bring more young people in for votes? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's such a huge question, right? Because people like to think that just because it's easy for them to vote, that it's easy for everyone to vote, right? They think that, again, going back to privilege, that, hey, I can go down and get an ID. I can go and just go to the precinct on election day and vote, and it's easy for me. So why is it hard for everyone else? But in actuality, one, our entire system of voting, we're still eroding decades, if not centuries, of mass voter disenfranchisement, top to bottom, designed not only to keep Black and brown folks from voting and participating, but something you said earlier, folks of any class lower than the high class from participating, right? Because there's this whole notion from the founding of our country, especially here, us in Virginia, that only the landed gentry, those well-educated, landowning white males, should be able to run for office, or let alone decide on who should run for office and vote. And so we're still struggling against those vestiges of, frankly, white supremacy, patriarchy, and classism when it comes to how we're even viewing voting. And, up until literally this year, if I wanted to vote early, I needed an excuse to do it, right? You have to check off one of 11 different reasons on why you wanted to vote early. Well, we are finally getting rid of that in this general election, but it took up until this point to do it. But to your point earlier about, younger people especially voting, we know that, we're just as we're able to have a conversation, a meeting, a forum, have you person to person across long distances. There's no reason why, like some other states do it, people can't vote online. There's no reason why we can't have it. So as soon as you turn 18, you're automatically registered to vote, and they send you something either through the mail or online on how to get registered, how to actually vote, how to participate. There's no reason why, as opposed to an opt-in situation like we have now in Virginia, you need to opt out in order to participate. So there's so many different ways that we can do it. Now, to get back to your question more pointedly, as a locally elected official, it also starts with, frankly, follow the money. We have underfunded our election offices so much on the local and state level. And part of that's because, for whatever reason, our federal government decides that we have to fund that stuff. It's not just a constitutional right to vote, so we'll just give everyone the money they need to get it done. So as a local elected official, we're in charge of funding our Department of Elections to actually run fair and free elections. We're in charge of making sure there's enough voting machines so people aren't waiting in line for hours. Tonya can tell you about all the horror stories we've had in Prince William County over the last 4 years, where even just this last year in the November election, in one precinct, it always just so happens to be in the precinct with Black and brown folks mostly, there were ballots where the ballot was the same on both sides, even though there's supposed to be different candidates in different races on the back of the ballot. Now, why does that happen? Is it because we don't have enough training or testing of our ballots? Is it because we frankly still have very archaic ways of running elections because of lack of funding? Or is it simply because we've had so many people for so long look at voting from a point of privilege and say that, well, if it's easy for the chosen few who already been voting for generations to vote, why should we make it easier? My answer is all the above. So what we're doing on the local level is we funded for the very first times in Prince William County history, hundreds of thousands of dollars on outreach to communities to be able to tell people there's an election. Here's how you get registered. Here's how you go and vote. If you can't vote in person, here's how you vote absentee. And if we've also talked to the state about this, especially right now under COVID, if you don't have a stamp, what young person runs around with a stamp on college campuses? I didn't when I was at Georgetown. But so instead of saying, oh, sorry, you don't have a stamp, too bad, so sad, we're like, no, we're still going to accept those ballots in those envelopes without stamps on them. And more to the point, to get to the end of this, who do we have running our elections and who's talking to our Board of Elections about this? Our registrar was in our Board of Supervisors meeting just this past week on Tuesday. And, you know, I asked her, hey, are you even talking to our county communications department? Because we have hundreds, if not thousands of emails and texts, phone numbers for texts, and all this huge communication network as a county that our Department of Elections was not leveraging to get the word out. So the other part of that is how are we leveraging our existing resources as a county? Because frankly, before us in those seats this year, it just really wasn't as much of a priority because the folks that were there were catering towards those chosen few people that always voted anyway, so they didn't care.
Oh, this is probably one of my favorite things to talk about right now, especially this year, because, you know, we wouldn't be talking about it if it were not for COVID. And that's the problem too, is that we aren't talking about how our elections are ran. Like, and to Kenny's point, that is a huge point of what our local government does. Like, people don't understand the elections for this year were funded, the planning for that and the budget was done last year. So I don't know if it was like April or May or when, Kenny, but we all went to the Board of Elections, we being members of our local Democratic committee, to make sure that we lobbied for fully funding our Board of Elections here in Prince William County, so that we would be able to fulfill that unfunded mandate that comes from the federal government and from the state government, so that we are able to have those additional voting sites. And now people right now are lobbying the government right now today to fund that, not realizing that funding was done last year. So if any local government wanted to change that, they would have to figure out where to take money from things that were already funded for. So that's a huge problem. And I think it comes to the point that the federal government and the state government need to stop putting these mandates. So when you hear about all these amazing laws, all these new voting laws that should be helping to make voting more accessible, in a lot of cases it goes unfunded in, you know, a locality that is Republican leaning, because like Kenny said, those folks don't need to be motivated to vote. They have the privilege to go vote on election day. They're not commuting, so it's really easy for them to vote. But what happens to those localities that are very red but have people of color and, you know, communities that are underserved trying to vote? So that's where getting engaged at your local level politics, going to your Board of County Supervisors meeting and hearing about what's happening, going to your city council meetings and hearing about what's being talked about. Because one thing that I once heard, and this was Kerry Washington who said this, and I think she said it in 2016 maybe, that you may not be thinking about politics, but politics is thinking about you. And that is exactly what's happening at these Board of County Supervisor meetings, at these city and county council meetings, what's happening at, on the floor of these state houses, our House of Delegates, what is being talked about, what is being proposed. But just like we did in 2017 when we elected 3 statewide Democrats, and we were able to pick up all these seats, mainly in Loudoun and Prince William. We were able, in those Democratic candidates ran on expanding Medicaid or Medicare. That's what they ran on. And as soon as they were sworn in, what did people do? People went and they lobbied for it. Even though they knew they had support, they went and lobbied for it. So it's more, the voter education piece doesn't stop on election day. It goes on. And I think we've grasped it pretty good at this point here in Virginia, that it's also a huge part of the voter education piece is the lobbying for what, you've worked so hard to get these electeds in office for. We worked so hard to get candidates like Kennedy and all the other new members of the Board of County Supervisors, because we wanted to get rid of this dangerous 287G program in Prince William. And guess what? It's gone. So I'd say that with regard to voting, there was sweeping legislation that was passed by our General Assembly in the 2020 session. Does it go far enough? No, it does not go far enough, because with some of those new laws, funding needs to be attached to those laws as it goes to the localities. And I think too much weight, too much pressure is on the localities to figure out how to take care of all these unfunded mandates. So if you ever hear the term unfunded mandate, it is not a good thing. It's not something, especially if it's coming from, the federal government all the way down. It's basically saying, yeah, we'll pass this law, but y'all got to figure out how to pay for it. And that's what happens with a lot of voting laws. And I think that's where the buck needs to stop, and we need to force change there. So has change occurred? Yes. Should it go further? Absolutely, yes.
Thank you, Tonya and Kenny, for those great responses. And I have loved the quote. Tonya, I also wrote down your quote earlier with, you can't change the world, but you can change the world you live in. I really liked that. So we have a couple questions in the chat here. I'm happy to read them out loud, but if you'd like to speak on your own question, feel free to say so. Jessica Berg says, in terms of canvassing, registering voters, and voting in general this November, are there concerns about turnout?
For me, there's always concerns about turnout. I never want to live in a world where we think that we have won it. I fight every day as if we are the underdog. I know 90% of the people do not know who Senator Warner's opponent is. I don't care. I am fighting as if Senator Warner is the underdog. But I would say that with turnout in Virginia, it has been trending up for the last 3 years. It's jumping in localities at least 20% each election, which is positive, but it's not something I'm really willing to rest on and take for granted. So I know our goal is that we run a program, a statewide program, to where we encourage voters to vote early, rather in person or absentee, but just to try to get as many voters that have voted before Election Day, so that we don't have to be stressing on turnout on Election Day. The primaries were turnout for the primaries were incredibly high for Democrats, but it was also, in some cases, incredibly high for Republicans as well. So with keeping that in mind, I wouldn't say that we don't see that Democrats are there's definitely still motivation there for Democrats to vote, and Democrats are still extremely motivated and ready to vote in November. But we're not going to take any of that for granted. We're going to continue to fight as if turnout is going to be the worst in a decade.
Yeah, so I would piggyback off of that by saying that COVID is the big wild card in all this, right? We've seen that folks like Tonya and other folks who are actually on the ground doing the work have done a really good job of pushing more people towards absentee, like she just said, whether it's in-person absentee or mail-in ballot absentee, and we're seeing the fruits of that. But the thing is that primaries and general election pools are still very different pools of people. You know, your primary voter that votes in a primary is already very motivated. They're a lot more keyed in than your general election voter. They generally are a lot more proactive when it comes to getting involved and knowing what they need to do and what have you. And they're either willing to understand that if they're afraid for their safety, they should do a mail-in or some other precaution, or they're going to, take it upon themselves to care for themselves enough when they get into that ballot box to take care of themselves. Your general election voter, especially in a presidential election year, doesn't necessarily always fit that mold. This may be the first time this person has voted in literally 4 years. They'll be walking up to try to vote in November. The last time they may have even thought about voting was when Donald Trump got elected, or maybe even before that. This person that walks in that voting booth could have been one of those people, one of those millions of people that stayed home in 2016 thinking, there's no way Donald Trump can win. I voted back in 2012 when Obama was on the ballot again. We're good. Hillary's got it, whatever. But now they're like, well, crap, what do we do now? And they're going to be walking this voting booth for the first time. And let's say the person taking their ID doesn't have a mask on. Let's say this person walks in and they're suddenly like, oh, wait, this is an enclosed space, and I could catch COVID and not even knowing, take it back to my family. We don't know what is going to be underlying in this voter's head when they're going to be trying to walk into that voting booth. So we cannot take anything for granted, to Tanya's point. We can't act like just because there's a lot of enthusiasm behind our candidates and against Donald Trump that things are going to look like what they should in terms of our projections on them. We can't trust polls. We learned that 4 years ago, the hardest way we possibly could. So what I would say to that, just to finish up, is we have to act like we're running from behind. We have to act like Tonya said, that we're the underdogs, that we don't have the advantage, that we need every single person to do whatever they need to do to vote. And if that's taking better precaution and telling people, hey, we know you may not have voted in the last 4 years and we have this whole big COVID thing, here's how you vote absentee, or here's a Chase program where, we heard that you have an absentee ballot out there that you requested it. Are you okay? Do you have it? Are you able to send it back in the next, 24, 48 hours? Whatever we need to do to make people feel comfortable enough to vote, we need to be taking that route, because we cannot feel like we got this one in the bag, because that's how we got in the situation to begin with. So yes, I am concerned.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really big fear for everyone. And like you said, Kenny, COVID is the wild card. And so Nikita has a question for Tonya, and then another question for Kenny. Her question for Tonya is, you mentioned earlier that finding the entry point into politics was the most difficult part for you. Would you mind explaining what that entry point is?
Right, just finding a way to get involved. And this, again, was post 2016 election. So a lot of groups were popping up, like Indivisible and a lot of the local huddles. But I still didn't know. I don't know if it was me per se, because I was just out of the Marine Corps, had never really spent a lot of time getting engaged at that level within my community, but it was still challenging. But finally, I just after some research online, and I found a group called New Virginia Majority, which is a very powerful group here in Northern Virginia and throughout Richmond and the Norfolk area as well. And they focus on, voter education and restoration of rights and voter registration in underserved communities of color. So I was able to start getting involved with them, and then the summer came and gearing up for the 2017 governor's race. And with that, the Democratic Party of Virginia put out a fellowship program. And I was like, oh, this seems really, really cool. So I started at that lowest point, and just, engaging at that point in networking and meeting, volunteers and activists like Kenny and like so many others who were able to point me in the right directions. But it is something that I wish was more visible. I wish that we as activists threw a wider net in trying to recruit and mobilize people of all different backgrounds and all different colors to be able to build that bench, because we always talk about building a bench of candidates to run for state, local, and federal office, but we don't talk about building a bench on the other side that's going to do the candidate recruitment, that's going to do the trainings for those candidates, that's going to be able to help local Dems committees run local elections, that's going to be able to learn how to do all the things that we need to do on the other side, on the campaign side, with regard to organizing, with regard to, campaign finance, with regard to communications. Like, we need people on that side as well that can start and learn and come up into leadership, so that we do have people at the table when conversations are being had about how do we recruit organizers to, organize in underserved communities of color. How late should we let our organizers knock doors? No, it's not safe for a person of color to knock doors at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, so that we have people having those conversations. So I just wish that the entry point was wider, and I think it is all of our responsibility to make it wider as part of whatever organization we're part of, whatever grassroots movement we want to be a part of. That has to be a keystone piece of that.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you saying that organizations that have sprouted up have become the entry point for a lot of young people. And then Nikita's question for Kenny was, I saw that you were running, or that you currently are the Occoquan supervisor, correct? I'm not really informed on what this position entails, but I remember you saying that local positions have a greater impact on citizen day-to-day lives. Would you mind sharing and explaining what your platform consists of and how you want to impact the average citizen in your district?
Sure. So that's a great question. So first, I'll preface this by saying, unfortunately, this is the last one I have time to answer. I have a meeting that's going to start pretty soon. I have to run into. Sorry about that. I didn't realize it was in my calendar until a couple of minutes ago. But to answer that question in reverse, so my platform is Kitchen Table Issues. So this will help answer what we do. So as a local county board of supervisors, we control the lion's share of the taxes that you pay. And what happens to that money. Here in Prince William County, that means that a huge chunk of that money should be going to the school system, for example. We have the second largest school division in Virginia, but we have the most diverse, where it's majority non-white, and almost 1 in 4 is either the child of an immigrant or an immigrant themselves. So there's a lot of needs there, whether it's ESL, whether it's special needs, whether that's gifted programs, whether that's socioeconomically disadvantaged students that need a little bit more help in terms of free and reduced lunch. There's a lot of needs that are there. And so for me, education is a very big thing. And actually the thing I had to jump off for just got moved, so I'm good. So Education's big for me because I come from a very low income community, like I said, very immigrant heavy in LA. But I went to Georgetown University. Now, I was literally paying for that choice up until the beginning of this year in the form of college debt. But it opened so many doors for me where a lot of folks that grew up on my street didn't have. I was one of those lucky ones to get out. And since I'm on an audience of mostly Black and brown people, you know exactly what I'm talking about, being on a street where you're lucky to get out. So for me, that's a big deal, making sure that we have equitable opportunities for real education for no matter who you are, what you look like, who you love, what have you. So that's one. We are the major funders of our school system here. And we know that school system is how we give people a hand out of and up from wherever they are. Number two is transportation. Us in Northern Virginia know that we have some of the most crowded and congested roadways in the entire country. And again, I'm from LA. I thought it was bad out there, but one of the biggest, most congested areas in the entire country runs through my district on 95 between DC and Fredericksburg. That's a problem. That means that pre-COVID, people were spending upwards of an hour and a half to 2 hours to go 25 miles from where I live to DC every day, and then have an hour and a half back at night. So how are we making things less congested, but more importantly, how are we making sure that our transportation system is equitable for all people? Because not everyone is privileged enough to have access to a car every day, to jump in a car, to get to work, to get to school, to get their doctor's appointments or wherever they need to go. So how do we push that forward too? Third is jobs. 75% of people that live in Prince William County don't work in Prince William County. And that's partly because we're all framed around people going into the Beltway every day for work. But more importantly, that's because most of the jobs here are not living wage jobs. Most of the jobs here are retail or restaurant workers. And because our minimum wage here is $7.25, thankfully in Virginia, we're starting to change that, but federally it's still $7.25. People are not able to live where they work or work where they live. People need 2 or 3 jobs. We have a large teacher population, for example, that do work here, where there's actually 2 teachers that live in my apartment complex that they need to live together to survive, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to afford to live in Prince William County. So that's jobs. Number 4 is health and human services. And I talked about this at the outset, but I lost my mom to homelessness and substance abuse 4 years ago. And that's because we don't invest enough in our social services, whether that's homelessness, substance abuse, mental health, all these other issues where if we paid and invested a lot more in helping people before they fall on hard times and before they're in emergency rooms or before they're hospitalized on the brink of death, we would not only be doing the right thing, but we'd be saving millions of dollars of taxpayer money because people wouldn't be in the emergency room. They wouldn't be incarcerated, for example. They wouldn't be in all these situations where they are there because the system failed them and they didn't get the help they needed at the beginning of the line, as opposed to being in that emergency social safety net there at the end. So that's my platform, you know, the kitchen table issues that affect you every day. And again, to what we do is our 2 biggest jobs as supervisors, like I said before. One is what happens with your taxpayer dollars. Are we funding schools with them or just police stations and incarceration? Are we funding good transit systems, or are we just building roads everywhere where we know that just paving everything doesn't fix anything? Are we putting our money towards your social programs, or are we just putting it towards economic development to give people tax breaks? Or are we investing that in the kinds of economic development that brings good paying jobs that employ frontline workers instead of forcing them into grocery stores so they can catch COVID? Those kinds of decisions. The second biggest thing that we do in our job as supervisors is land use. Where can people build what and how? Does that mean residential neighborhoods? Does that mean commercial businesses? Does that mean roads? Does that mean the kinds of things? Are these apartment complexes? Are these single family homes? Are people able to come in and build whatever they want? Or are we saying, no, we don't want you to build that toxic asphalt plant next to a low income neighborhood? We make those decisions. And that's one of those things that people don't realize. Where things get built, that isn't Congress, that isn't your state government. That's us on a local level. And so that's where we have to look at why it's important that we elect local elected officials that share your values and your view of life and your lived experience.
Absolutely. Thank you for discussing those issues, Kenny. And it's so great to hear you talking about the same issues you ran on, and not really seeing this huge fluctuation in what you believe in. And I think the consistency is great, and we really appreciate it. I think we've got a few more questions here in the chat. Let's see here. I think Amy's is next. She said, from what I've heard, Republicans are door knocking and Dems aren't. Do you think that puts Dems at a real disadvantage? So I think this is pretty similar to Jessica Berg's question above. But yeah, I'm actually really curious about this as well. So
I don't even understand why. Well, I do understand why they would be knocking doors, but it has been the standard for the vice president as well as for the senator, but mainly for the vice president, that the most important thing right now is safety. And I was just reading on an article earlier where there was a group, I don't believe that it was a Republican or Democratic group, but it was a group that shared it was a grassroots group, and they'd been knocking doors, paid canvassers, and I think like 10 of the canvassers came down with and tested positive for COVID. This was not, of course, in Virginia, but it's still a concern across the country. So I don't think it does put us at a disadvantage, one, because I know that we are really good at how we target and how we talk to voters, how we engage voters, at this point, we've sent almost 2 million texts to voters, both for persuasion to get them to support, and as well as invite them to events, which we do have a weekend of action this weekend for the vice president's economic plan. So definitely please go to virginiavictory.org to find that. Those events, I had to do a plug, I'm sorry. But I don't think we are losing any ground by not knocking doors. It doesn't matter if we're knocking doors, if we're not going to be able to vote because we're sick. So, but what is important is that we're having those conversations with our friends and our families, and we're having those conversations, frankly, online about what's at stake this November, and the importance of not only voting, but understanding what you need to do to set yourself up for success if you're going to vote by a mail-in ballot. So no, we'll continue to send texts. We'll continue to call voters on the phone. We'll continue to, some of our friends out there are doing postcards, and our local state party, as well as our campaigns, will send mailers out to voters. So there's other ways that we can reach voters, but we are not interested in knocking on a voter's door and putting, one of our volunteers, one of our staff members, as well as the voter in harm's way right now. We're just not going to do it.
Right. And I would say, I mean, I'm sure I can speak for Tonya and myself on this. Without COVID, we'd be knocking on doors until we're blue in the face every single day. Knock thousands of doors, would love to do it. We can't, because of the safety of ourselves, our colleagues, and most importantly, our constituents. That is my paramount responsibility as an elected official, especially, life. That's the biggest thing that I believe. I believe that I have a vested interest as an elected official to protect the lives and well-being of my constituents. So, I might be fine. I might be asymptomatic. So I would never want to go to someone's door and get their family infected because I had no idea, just for the sake of an election. This election is important, but I don't think this election is over getting anyone killed or sick over, for example. But to what Tonya's point is, we don't have to do that. To me, it comes down to who are we talking to anyway, right? A lot of the people that we're going to be talking to would frankly be turned off if suddenly I showed up to your house and risked you with infection by saying, hey, I want to talk to you about this election right now. Yes, you want to know about the election, but what does it say about a candidate or a campaign or me as an elected official that I'm willing to go and risk myself or your health to talk to you about this? that might turn off a voter, and I don't want to do that either. Well, unfortunately, especially the other side, they don't care about that. You know, their voters are going to vote anyway, like Tonya said. They don't need any motivation anyway. So they're not gaining anything by doing that. If anything, they're hurting themselves because they may be infecting their own people with it. And I don't wish that on them, but that's what's probably happening right now. And so to get back to the overall question, and what Tonya touched upon, we're becoming very creative, especially this year, in how we do voter outreach. And so the upside of that is that we're now thinking about reaching out to people in ways that were our second or third tier ways of doing it in the past, because we were focused on knocking on doors. But the flip side of that is, because so many people are now responsibly staying inside their houses and are more open to having even something like this where it's an online discussion, they're more receptive to those non-traditional, non-door knocking ways of outreach too. So, you know, we're able to still have those connections with voters as if we were going and knocking on their doors, and we're keeping them safe, which they appreciate. They appreciate a campaign and candidates, elected officials, to your point earlier on consistency, who walk the talk, who are saying, I want you to be safe by wearing a mask, staying socially distanced, and staying at home, and I'm doing that too. And we're having this conversation because I still want you to vote, but I care enough about you that I'm not going to just show up at your house randomly and then risk you or me with infection to try to talk to you about an election.
Absolutely. And I think those were, it's a really well addressed question. And I think that's a concern in the back of everyone's mind, and maybe a bit of, an underlying fear. So Barb's question is next. You briefly, both of you already sort of touched on the first two parts of her question, but I'll still ask it in case there's something that's been missed. But the question is, what initiatives are you taking to reach voters this year? Will we be canvassing? What is the response rate by phone banking and texting? So you guys already mentioned that canvassing is not happening, and you've talked a little bit about initiatives, but I guess more specifically, what is the response rate?
I thought Kenny, no. With response rate, so with texting, the response rate is pretty high. There was a study done about texting, and people are 95% likely to respond to a text. Of course, it has to, the script has to look like it's coming from a real person. I mean, it is coming from a real person, but just how we input it into our texting tool is what makes the difference. So texting is about, it's pretty high of a percentage, what I would consider high, which is hovering around 40%. Of course, it's going to depend on what the ask is for, right? Phone banking is a lot higher than it typically has been because people are home more often now than in past years. So phone banking has been really beneficial as well this year. So a lot better. Of course, nothing is better than door-to-door, knocking that contact rate. But I've been extremely surprised at how good phone banking has been this year, as well as our texting rate as well. Because now in our vote builder van, we have verified cell phone numbers. So it's, it used to just be a number and you wouldn't know if it was a cell phone number or a landline. But now that we have verified cell phone numbers in van, it's a lot easier to be able to pull those out and send text to. And we've been doing a lot of virtual events just like this, both with, the senator and some of our incumbents, and we're going to start doing them with our new candidates as well. And those have been really helpful in mobilizing Democrats to get involved and to prepare to do mail-in voting and absentee in-person voting this year. So I've been surprised, Barb, but it's been pretty good.
Yeah, I want to quickly just do a shout out to Barb Jones, who has been an activist in the trenches just as long as the rest of us. She's awesome. And Barb will always be one of my favorite people in Virginia. That being said, I agree with everything that Tonya just said. You know, it's one of those things where part of what people don't realize is that every election cycle is a dress rehearsal for the next election cycle. And what I mean by that is not only as a candidate or an organizer or what have you, but it's also the data that we collect and the information on each individual voter we come into contact with. So a verified cell phone that we've gotten this election cycle may have been finally verified last year or during the primaries or even back in 2017 or 2018. So it's all about making sure that we have good quality folks who are continuing to do the work of every time they have an interaction with a voter, especially if they're collecting information like a cell phone or like where they stand on a certain candidate or issues, they're putting that information back in VAN. So then the next election cycle, someone who does phone banking doesn't have to sit through figuring out whether or not this is a good cell phone number or not and having to do that work of having to filter out all that bad data. So it's not a perfect science, obviously, because we have different volunteers of all different levels and organizers are doing different things. But to highlight the fact that things are better now because of the work we did in the past 3 or 4 years, and will keep getting better, and that hopefully will result in even better results when phone banking and texting and what have you.
Absolutely. And Nikita, Roma, and Grace and I consistently joke about how we're a Barb fan club. So we love Barb just as much as everyone else. And of course, she left a humble comment in the chat saying, thank you, we're a team. Yes, we do love you, Barb. So Barb's second question is, what steps will you be taking to ensure safety for voters voting at the polling place? I've heard from a grassroots group in Wisconsin that they're creating safety kits for in-person voters, providing masks, gloves, and bringing your own pen.
Sure. So I'll take that one first if you don't mind, Tonya. So on again to what we talked about earlier, local is where all these elections are happening. Whether it's a federal election like we have this year, or a state or local election, we're the ones that are responsible for how we organize that process. So first, we are trying to make sure that as many people really, frankly, utilize mail-in voting and early voting as possible, so we don't have large amounts of people going to the polls on election day to begin with. And so as a locality, what we're doing is we're having early voting, and we're also going to be expanding our early voting locations as we get closer to election day. Because Tonya will tell you, for example, the closer you get to election day, the more people will early vote. There's a sort of a funnel system where right now, maybe we have a couple hundred people who have requested absentee ballots. You know, a month from now, once we get into August, it'll start to pick up. Then once we get into September, especially October, it'll be the floodgates. And so what we're doing as a locality is once we get to that September, October period, we're going from having 3 absentee voting locations in person to 5. And making those in strategic places to make sure people can go and get this done earlier as opposed to waiting to election day. But it also serves as a good test way to make sure we have all the precautions in place and make sure our people are trained. Because unfortunately, we still are hurting for people to volunteer to be election officers. And what that means is we have a gamut of people that have different views of different things, and why that may be a problem is we unfortunately still have some anti-maskers who are poll workers, which is an issue. So what we can do there is we can put in mandates. So on the state level, Governor Northam recently came out with strict guidelines on masking, on social distancing, on sanitation, quality guidelines, things like that. And we can implement those into our polling location. We can implement those into the training videos and the training materials we give the poll workers, and we can enforce those very strongly, because guess what? I don't want to be responsible for someone getting sick because some poll worker wasn't taking things seriously. So we're reinforcing those as we get closer and closer to election day. And so again, to finally get to your main question is, what steps are we taking? I just alluded to them. Very strict training and sanitation guidelines for our poll workers. Screening our poll workers to make sure they're not sick walking into the polls on election day, whether that's tests right before, that's temperature checks as they walk in, and during the day having wellness checks with the precinct chiefs, and making sure that we don't have anyone that even looks like they may be coming down with something. And also, honestly, looking at the folks as they come in, making sure they're following masking guidelines. We cannot force people to wear a mask when they walk in, but we can highly encourage it, and we can give them masks as they walk in. And because we've had to stockpile so many masks as a county for our own workers and for people interacting with our county, we're still massively expanding that stockpile with both us and the school system, because a lot of polling locations are schools, to make sure there's no question for if you walk into a polling location, you'll be given a mask as you want, gloves as you want, and we want to make sure every surface you come in contact with is sanitized, including the pins, including the voting booths themselves, including all the machines and everything else. And we probably will not be giving out stickers this year, and I know that sucks, but that's just because, again, that's another opportunity for someone to get something that may not be safe, and we don't want to do that. So we're looking at the whole 9 yards, and we're making sure that our poll workers understand that these are not suggestions, they are guidelines that they need to follow.
Absolutely. Tonya, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Kenny was pretty comprehensive, but please go.
Right. I don't have much to add to that. What happens on election day at the polls is really a function of the state and local government. Of course, we are going to do all that we can to make sure that our Democratic volunteers who are there are safe, and they have all the things that they need to be safe, as far as masks, as far as hand sanitizer. I don't believe that many localities will be handing out sample ballots this year. I know a lot of the Dems committees are looking for other ways instead of handing out lit or handing out sample ballots. I don't think that that's going to be something that we're going to be able to do this year, but a lot of that does lie in the space of the local governments.
Absolutely. I don't want to keep everyone too long here. We've got 2 quick questions, and then I wanted to ask you guys for a final call to action pitch. But Nikita's question is about reaching voters. Have you thought about, or are you already using social media platforms like TikTok to spread information about how to vote and also reach younger voters?
Yeah.
So Tonya, being from the coordinated campaign, love to hear from you.
Yes, we definitely use social media platforms in many different ways. We do it, from a coordinated campaign aspect. Follow us at Team Warner on Twitter. We also do it through our candidates, on Facebook. So I know you've seen a lot of the Joe Biden groups in Virginia. Please join those as well. And, you will see highlights of their plans and their programs on both Facebook and Instagram. We will not be on TikTok because, the senator doesn't necessarily believe in TikTok at the moment, but we're doing as much as we can. And if y'all have any fun ideas, I know you probably all saw the tuna melt. That's a rough one. But if you have any ideas for our Digi team, please let me know, and I'll be sure to share it with them.
So yeah, I'm at this weird age now. I'm 33, so I'm always like a half step behind of everyone. I used to be the cool kid that was on the cutting, bleeding edge of all the technology, but I got onto Instagram, for example, when everyone was already transitioning to Snapchat. And now I'm on Snapchat, now everyone's on TikTok or doing, and 2 years ago it was Boomerang. So I'm there mostly, I would say 75%, I'm where everyone is, but I'm just like half a step behind. But I still have a very strong online social media presence. I have had for a long time, since I am, like I said, an older millennial. My Facebook is where I'm most comfortable. So I have a huge Facebook presence. I also use Twitter, I also use Instagram. I haven't gotten quite onto TikTok yet, but that's to say we are doing an all of the above strategy. Like I said, TikTok is really, to Tanya's point, the only place where we're not playing as much as we could. But we do, make Boomerang videos. We do Facebook posts. We do videos all the time. I know that Facebook Live, and I'm also on Instagram TV. I know that we need to go to where folks are and where young people are, and it's all about, you know, where we're getting our content from, right? And we know that short videos where we're doing something wacky, or we're just doing a quick inflow verb on something on how someone can get involved is the most compelling way to reach to young people and say, hey, this is what's going on. Here's what you can do to get involved. Thanks so much for everyone for your help. So I'm all over the place. I like to do all that stuff, and we'll keep hammering away at it. To Tanya's point, if you guys have any more ideas on how we can reach more young people, get them more involved, and you really get more buy-in from them on getting them to make videos and stuff like that to their friends for it to be organic, because you know, Tanya and I can say all we want, but we know the most powerful person that can reach out to you and your friends are you. We know that you have a lot more credibility with your friends than we do, and that you are able to speak to them in ways that we still can't. So whatever you guys can do, help us out, and whatever we can do to empower you to get that message out, please let us know.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think TikTok can be a kind of controversial app. But I think that from young people, you will hear that that's the easiest way to contact them. It's it's like a really fun social media source. Grace is probably frowning at me because I actually don't have TikTok, and I've been adamant against getting it, but I have heard that it's been really great. And I also know that it's where we've pulled a lot of really great young people for our Allies for Black Voices sessions from TikTok, and they've been really great. Barb, so wait, Jessica Berg asked about you could do something like a takeover where you follow, where you take the platform of someone who already has a large following for the day. I think that was more of a DigiTeam suggestion. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to run really quickly to Barb's question about outreach to young people to work the poll. She wants to know if you guys are reaching out to young people because a lot of older people might be hesitant to work during COVID.
Yes. So to talk about the takeover really quickly before I get to Barb's question, it was funny because I was endorsed by Run for Something last year, which most folks I would imagine know. Run for Something is an organization that spawned out of the 2016-2017 election cycle, where they went and actively looked for young people and first-time candidates to run for office. The second time around, I was endorsed by them, and they allowed me to do a takeover of their Instagram and their Twitter page, and suddenly I was able to reach thousands of people. So that's definitely something that can be very effective. I don't know if Tanya could get the senator to have someone hijack his social media for a day, or to have Senator Warner hijack Vice President Biden's social media for a day or something like that. But it is helpful, and it allows folks to see a fresh take on some of the social media. To get back to Barb's question, yes. So unfortunately, right now on the local level, we, up until this election cycle anyway, required folks to do a 13 to 14-hour shift as a poll worker at a precinct. And that's a long time for anyone, old, young, what have you, be sitting in the same place for upwards of 13, 14 hours. But what we've posed to them is like, if we can get more people to volunteer, would you be willing to do shifts instead and have it so people could rotate in and out? And so they said, hey, you get some more people to do it, and we'll do that. So we're still looking into getting as many people as we can to do that. But yes, especially since right now a lot of people are still at home, we have a lot of people that will be not going back to their campuses once school gets back, and they'll be doing virtual learning and what have you. We are reaching out to more young people because they'll be home, frankly, when they weren't necessarily before, to work the polls. And so every locality, by and large, has their own board of elections. For Prince William County, it's pwcvotes.com, and that has right on that first page a place where you can volunteer to become a poll worker. And there's training, there's orientations, things that make it very easy to get involved and to learn the ropes. And we, frankly, because there's a lot of older people, have a lot of good institutional knowledge on people that will be able to show you how easy it is to become a poll worker. So that's definitely in the cards what we're doing. And if you guys know anyone who's willing and able to do it, please reach out to us because we need more poll workers.
Tanya, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to that.
I don't, because on the campaign side we don't recruit poll workers, but I think that that is a really, really good idea, especially if, people or students are still going to be at home in the fall. I think that's a really good idea. And I definitely support the local government trying to do a huge campaign to try to push them to do that. I mean, because they do make a little money as well. So that could definitely be a highlight for it.
Absolutely. So I wanted to ask you guys one last very, very quick question. I was wondering if you guys could give us a 30-second pitch to voters or the audience that you'd like to reach today that are going to, be able to watch this online and through our Instagram about what you want for this year, for the fall, for going forward. It can be about literally anything, but just like a super quick pitch would be great.
Well, as you all know, it is 2020, and this is the most important election of our lives. We are literally in for the fight of our lives, for our lives, and it is more important now than ever that every single person is called to action and gets involved at every single level. So we do have our weekend of action this weekend for the Vice President's amazing economic plan for underserved communities of color and for small businesses, and how he plans to restart the economy. We have surrogate events all throughout Virginia. We have volunteer events all throughout Virginia. I'm going to drop the link in the chat, as well as please go to www.markwarnerva.com and you'll see our Mobilize link, and you'll find events that you can volunteer from home. So please, let's get involved. Let's win an election. Let's protect Virginia, and let's protect our entire country.
Sure. Thank you, Tonya. And thank you guys again for organizing. This is awesome. Hope we can have something like this again in the future. What I would say is it gets better, but only if you want it to get better. And what I mean by that is we have a lot going on right now in society. We have this pandemic, we have a recession, we have a renewed state of racial unrest in our country, and all these things are not siloed out, right? They are all connected. And it goes back to who is making decisions and who is driving and who is at the steering wheel here. And we see what has happened when we have terrible people at the steering wheel. We see what happens when we frankly let our grandparents make decisions for us on the state, federal, and local level. Because one of my friends made it, and it's all on around the internet, but when it comes to voting and people in office, you wouldn't want your grandparents making your fashion choices for you, right? So why do you let your grandparents choose who our elected officials are? Why are we letting and ceding power to those who lived and grew up in a much different time than we do? No other generation has had to deal with not one, but two recessions at the same time in their lifetimes. No other generation has had to watch, under false pretenses, our friends and family and loved ones get sent off to a war for 20 years, right? But it's because we've let so many people for so long make decisions for us. We have the ability, we have the power, we have the numbers to fundamentally change who makes decisions for us. And once we get people in office that look like us, who talk like us, who have our lived experience, that came up in the situation that we're in, we can make things better, not only for ourselves, but for our grandparents, for our loved ones, for our family, for our significant others, and most importantly, for everyone that comes after us. Because to me, that's what it's about. I want to leave the world a better place than what I found, and I know everyone on here wants to do that too. I know that every single one of you doesn't want to be having these same conversations another 5-10 years from now. We want to look back 5-10 years from now and say, look what we did to make the world and make our country a better place. And that starts with you. That starts with asking yourself what you can do, not 5 days from now, not this weekend, but right now, to get involved and to do whatever you can to push that envelope with yourself just a little bit, to say, hey, I did something to make things better. I got involved. I did what I needed to do. I did the work to make sure that all the people at the table making decisions for us are us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny. It has been an absolute delight to have both of you here today. Like we previously thought, you guys complement each other so well. And we've had a great time hearing you guys answer some really tough questions. So Nikita is going to post the socials up on the screen for Tonya and Kenny, who are both great people to follow and reach out to if you want to get involved. I think the Allies for Black Voices Remind will be on there. If you're not already subscribed to our Remind, please text 81010 with the message Allies for to know when we're going to have our sessions. We have weekly sessions. We have a speaker for every week for the rest of the summer, and you never know what's coming in front of us. So again, thank you all for being here, and we'll leave these socials up for a few seconds, but thanks for coming.